organismos internacionales. Muy buenos días a todas y todos.
Welcome everybody, welcome you all to Santa Marta, which is the heart of the world.
And to bring together a group of committed countries and stakeholders ready to move forward with the implementation of a just, orderly, and equitable transition away from fossil fuels. We are giving hope to the world. To begin, we invite you to turn your attention to the screen for a moment.
Colombia es un país donde la naturaleza no es paisaje, es hogar, es identidad, es sustento, es esperanza. Y cuando el futuro se defiende, la historia empieza a cambiar. Por eso, Colombia junto a los Países Bajos hace un llamado al mundo. A abrir una nueva era más allá de los combustibles fósiles. Del 24 al 29 de abril, Santa Marta, el corazón del mundo, será la sede de la primera conferencia para la transición más allá de los combustibles fósiles. Un lugar donde comunidades, pueblos, gobiernos y líderes del mundo cambiarán el rumbo, con los territorios y la biodiversidad en el centro.
Colombia, país de la belleza. Es un honor en este momento invitar a Su Excelencia Irene Vélez Torres, Ministra de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible de Colombia.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to acknowledge the effort of all the people that have gone through oceans and mountain ranges to get here, to Ministro Esquinche, who is my colleague in this, all the ministers and vice ministers, or the directors of almost 70 countries, as the chief of diplomatic missions, commissioners, and UN delegates, and from other multilateral organisms, and the bank that is here present, to whom we need as a partner in these transitions, all colleagues of the different social movements, the peoples and the faith groups, and all civil societies, NGOs, faith groups. Welcome to Colombia, the country of beauty. We decided to develop this conference in Santa Marta, the heart of the world, because it expresses one of the biggest contradictions of our world. Because on the one hand, it's the highest coastal mountain range in the world that rises from the Caribbean Sea to 5,500 meters above sea level, creating a biogeographical island with a high level of diversity, ecosystems, and cultures with 5 millennial indigenous peoples. At the same time, Santa Marta is one of the main coal export ports in Colombia and the Americas. From Puerto Drummond and Puerto Nuevo, we calculate that more than 800 million tons of coal have moved into international markets, basically European markets, with an impact of 1,000 million tons of equivalent CO2. If the Colombian Amazon were healthy and in good standing, this amount of emissions would take more than 5 decades in being absorbed. And this is why this is an impossible compensation. It's an unfeasible balance, and it's an unreachable goal. We would trying to acknowledge the synergy between biodiversity and climate change, the eliminations of fossil fuels. It's unavoidable to be able to save the life of the planet. Heraclito, who was a pre-Socratic philosopher, defines the existence of the origin of nature as a struggle between opposites. But it's a dialectic. The dialectics doesn't describe a contradiction between us. However, it's a primary tension that generates movements. It's what drives all the transformation in life, in the desire to create new economies for life, led by our president Gustavo Petro. Colombia decided to bet on life. Following the best available science, we wanted to allot new hydrocarbon contracts and the expansion of carbon mining. We wanted to move in declaring the Amazons and the Amazonian as a reserve of renewable fossil fuels to be able to stop the expansion of extractive borders. And in 3 years, Colombia moved from 1% to 17% in its renewable power grid. It has not been easy, but the internal contradiction wouldn't stop us. As in Colombia, we can see that the world is undergoing a lot of tensions. Even before the war in the Middle East, we had been able to learn a very uncomfortable truth. It's that fossil fuels not only feed climate crisis, they are also responsible of the economic inequalities in of all the global economies. The hydrocarbon models has consolidated neo-colonial economies, impoverished, fragile, fiscally fragile, and tied to the export of carbon-intensive raw materials. This dependence, it's not casual. It's the outcome of a territorial or an economic that reproduces subordination and vulnerability. Even more, we can say that contemporary wars cannot be understood aside from the market of fossil fuels. We can see that the invasion to Ukraine, as Europe well knows, had a disruption of the gas supply in this continent. The current war in the Middle East has evidenced that oil, it's still a global destabilization of factors, and it also affects both the economies and the energy. We can say that economic sanctions have blocked Cuba from access to power supply, and it's even condemning to genocide. And these same unilateral sanctions haven't allowed Venezuela to have an energy market, and even it has biased its democracy. But we are not defending a higher dependence, or we are not advocating for holding on to the fossil fuel market. We are committed to decarbonizing our trade balance and to transform our fiscal system in a structural manner. More than 3 decades, we have sought for these dependencies to be discussed in multilateral context, and especially in the conference between the parties and beyond the UNC umbrella. Beyond the frustrations, we need to think about those limitations to be able to overcome the crisis of multilateralism. Our response are focused through an international cooperation that it's deeper, that it's more democratic and more efficiency. We are seeking multilateralism without de facto vetting it, that it's open to the participation of the peoples, and that it's capable of translating agreements into implementation. We are living in a fracture of the global order as we know it, but nowadays we are called not in fear or intimidation through tariffs. We are here because we are hopeful, and there is hope both in the capacity of collective actions amongst the ones who are here. We need to make this crisis a possibility to create a new architecture of international relationships, new access, new linings, new partnerships. It's an architecture that it's based in the solidarity amongst nations, in clean technologies, and that accessible, and that at the beginning, and also that they don't deny justice. Colleagues, let's celebrate that we are here, that we have more than 50 countries. We represent 1/3 part of the global oil consumption, and at the same time 1/3 part of the global GDP. Let's don't be distracted for the ones that are not here or the ones that haven't arrived, but those that are gathered here together represent a collective power. In the decades of the 2000s, there was a global social movement that inspired us with the idea of another possible world. Nowadays, with our express and willful statement, we want to say that this world is possible and it goes beyond fossil fuels.
Let these days be remembered not for the speeches we deliver, but for the discussions we make, the alliances we build, and the commitments we will defend bravely. Let this conference be the moment when ambition becomes action, when diplomacy becomes solidarity, and when cooperation becomes the path towards a future beyond fossil fuels. Let's make this a turning point in history. Thank you very much. Be very welcome.
Thank you, Minister. Now we have the honor to hear from Her Excellency Stintje van Welhoven, Minister of Climate and Green Growth of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Dear Excellencies, dear Commissioner, representatives of science, NGOs, youth and communities, ladies and gentlemen, dear Irene. It is so amazing to be here and have you all in this room. We had a beautiful little film about Colombia, but if I would show you a film about the Netherlands, I think what you would see, you would find dikes, long, quiet lines in our landscape. They're not so spectacular at first glance, but they tell a story. I need to put a microphone a little bit closer. Yes, of course. They tell a story about a country that understood early on that waiting was not an option. It is not a strategy. It tells a story about a country that knows that living with water requires planning, cooperation, and long-term thinking. And above all, a determined willingness to act before it is too late. Today we face a different kind of challenge. It is already deeply felt, however, in our economies, in our societies, in our security. And just like with the dikes, the question actually is not whether we act, but the question is whether we act in time and whether we act together. Because the same with the dikes, no farmer could build them alone. They depended on collaboration to actually ensure the security for all. And the science is very clear. About 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from fossil fuels. They come from the energy system. Coal, oil, gas, they make up 80% of our energy mix. So this is not an abstract challenge. It is a structural challenge. And the price volatility and import dependency are structurally impacting our economies. And I would say, if I look at the world today, in an unacceptable way. So the conclusion is unavoidable. We must transition away from fossil fuels, not just because it's good for climate, but because it also strengthens our energy independence and our energy security. And because the investment in clean energy builds the foundation for a sustainable and competitive economy that can hamper these kind of effects. We know that we can do this if we collaborate. We know that international collaboration is working. Thanks to the collective efforts, already projected global warming has been reduced by nearly 1.5 degrees. So it works. We also know it's not enough. We're not yet on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the consequences of further warming are severe and potentially catastrophic. That's what the science tells us very clearly. So therefore, at COP28, countries agreed that we should also, next to building more windmills, next to building more solar panels, we also have to start transitioning away from our use of fossil fuels. It was an important milestone, but it's difficult. And so moving away does not happen by itself. Demand, as well as supply, remains high. And as long as the demand is there, somebody will supply it. And many economies remain deeply dependent on fossil fuels, economically, socially, politically. And being responsible for both climate and energy and industrial decarbonization, I can tell you I live the challenges every day. Entire regions depend on coal production or oil, not just for their economy, but also for the livelihoods of the people that live in that region. So the transition really is not just about energy. It is about building a new economy. An economy rooted with sustainable industry, renewable energy system that empowers communities. Recent geopolitical crises have exposed the risk of relying on such a limited number of resources in such a limited number of countries. Energy prices surged. Supply chains are disrupted. Energy security, I think in all of our countries, is now a major cause of concern. It is both a climate and an economic issue. And that is why reducing our dependency on fossil fuels is so overdue. But the good news is there is an alternative. Clean energy, electrification, and innovation, you'll hear much more about what the science says, also in terms of the alternatives available. In the Netherlands, for example, this means phasing out coal-fired power plants, investing in green hydrogen, building a strong industrial base for the future, such as green steel. Here in Colombia and in other countries, it means expanding renewable energy, electrifying transport, creating decentralized, citizen-led systems for all those people who do not have access to energy yet. And this is where our countries come together with all of you, because we must do this in collaboration. And that is why Colombia and the Netherlands are co-hosting this first conference about transitioning away fossil fuels. A place where we can meet between governments, business, civil society, and academia to talk and to act. Also to be honest about the dilemmas, because this is not an easy transition. Fossil fuels are deeply ingrained in our economic financial system. It's hard to disentangle them. Let's put the dilemmas on the table, let's discuss them, and see if that discussion also helps us to solve them. The goal is clear. We need to contribute to implementing a global roadmap towards a fossil-free future. And let me also thank Brazil for all of the efforts that they have done during their COP presidency. Let me thank the personal commitment of Anatoni here in the room and your perseverance in making progress. And we aim to support your efforts. And I also want to acknowledge that we are here, but we build on many initiatives that have been taken by different groups of countries, by different organizations, to all try and push us in this direction. So let's make sure that we unite our forces, that we build a stronger movement together, because that is more needed than ever. This is now back on the agenda and should never be allowed to go off the agenda again. We can do that if we do this together. So it's about strengthening multilateralism, because the transition must be fair. Many countries in the global south face high debt and limited fiscal space. If this needs to be a truly global transition, then access to affordable finance is key. So concessional finance, exploring debt for nature swaps, creating the space for countries to invest in their future. In the end, this is in all of our interests. For countries in the global north, reducing fossil dependency means strengthening energy security, opening new economic opportunities, improving public health. But also for countries in the global south, all of this is valid, but it's also for them about developing, building resilient economies, creating new pathways for growth and a just transition. So this is not a trade-off. It's not one or the other, one region versus the other. This is a shared opportunity. And I hope if there's one thing that you take away from this conference, it is that sense of a shared opportunity that we can jointly harness. Let me return 1 second before I close to this image of the dikes. They were not built overnight. They required vision, patience, collaboration, and trust. Because it's hard to do what we are trying to do. Today, we are called upon to do something similar. not earth in stone, but policy, partnership, and shared commitments. A global process that does not protect one country, but protects all of us. I hope I can call on you at this conference to have an open dialogue. Leave your notes aside as much as you can. Talk to each other as people who are facing this challenge. If we truly do, and if we focus on what we can do in all of the challenges that we have, then we'll make tremendous progress. Thank you so much and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Minister, for those really, really inspiring words. We now invite to the podium Selvin Hart. He is the Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Climate Action and Just Transition. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And ministers, excellencies, colleagues, and friends. First, let me thank Minister Velez Torres and Minister Van Veldhoven of the Netherlands for their outstanding leadership, courage, vision, and for your extremely inspirational speeches this morning, and for convening this meeting at such a critical moment for our planet and for multilateralism. We meet in the midst of yet another global energy crisis. And once again, the same truth is laid bare. A global energy system built on fossil fuels is inherently unstable, volatile, and unreliable. At the same time, the climate crisis is accelerating. The past 11 years have been the warmest on record, with every key indicator on climate flashing red. Two crises, one common denominator: fossil fuels. Time and again, fossil fuel dependency has exposed countries to shocks that originate far beyond their borders, but land squarely on their people and their economies. 3 out of every 4 persons on this planet live in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels. That includes 1.4 billion people in China, 450 million people in the European Union, 1.4 billion people in India, and over 1 billion people in the least developed countries and small island developing states. Different economies, different circumstances, but a shared vulnerability, exposure to shocks they did not create and cannot control. So today, the urgency of transitioning away from fossil fuels is no longer only a climate or environmental imperative. It is a security imperative, an economic imperative, and a development imperative. Avoiding this issue and waiting, as the minister said, will not make the challenge disappear. It will only make the transition more disorderly, disruptive, and costly. At the same time, nearly 800 million people on this planet still lack access to electricity, including 600 million people in Africa. For them, this transition is not an abstract debate. It is about whether energy systems can finally deliver access, affordability, dignity, and opportunity. But what makes the current crisis different is that we now have a viable alternative. Renewables have changed the equation. They offer something fossil fuels never did and never can: stability, sovereignty, and control over one's own energy future, while providing the fastest and most cost-effective pathway to universal energy access. There are no embargoes, price shocks, tariffs, or tolls on wind or sunlight. And once a solar panel or wind turbine is installed, it generates homegrown power for decades without exposure to fossil fuel price shocks or supply disruptions. And the economics have shifted decisively. Renewables are now the cheapest and fastest source of new power in most of the world. And last year, global investments in clean energy doubled fossil fuels investments. But renewables are still not displacing displacing fossil fuels fast enough. And while the transition is accelerating, it remains uneven and deeply unequal. Thus far, the transition is highly concentrated in the advanced economies in China, leaving most of the developing world behind. Nowhere is this injustice more stark than in Africa. 60% of the world's best solar potential, 30% of the critical minerals needed for the energy transition, and just 2% of global clean energy investment. So the question is no longer whether we transition, it is how fast and how fairly we do it. Because the pathway is not simple, and history is littered with failed transitions, abrupt, unplanned, and deeply disruptive. We must not repeat these mistakes, but it is still within our hands to make the transition fair, managed, orderly, and grounded in cooperation. But let's be frank, powerful political interests are actively working to delay and undermine this transition, casting doubt on science, distorting economics, and undermining the integrity of climate information to protect the status quo and fossil fuel interests. Delay dressed up as debate, obstruction framed as pragmatism, and attacks and harassment of scientists, journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. And therefore, the role of these groups in this process is absolutely critical, and we must do everything that we can to protect them, our scientists, our journalists, our activists, and our human rights defenders. So, Excellencies, transitioning away from fossil fuels means confronting hard and difficult realities, including stranded assets, jobs and communities at risk, fiscal dependence in producer economies, especially low and middle-income producers, and persistent structural barriers facing developing countries, especially the high cost of capital. It also means overcoming policy and regulatory misalignment that slows clean energy deployment, raises risk, and fragments markets, and ensuring that the transition expands energy access, not constrains it. Colleagues, the destination is clear, but we are not all starting from the same starting point. Our task now is to navigate this pathway together. And this is why the Secretary General has called for the creation of a global platform for dialogue on transitioning away from fossil fuels. Not another talking shop, but a sustained, action-oriented platform for problem solving. A platform to bring together governments, energy producers and consumers, civil society, including youth, labor, and indigenous people, as well as industry, finance, and international institutions to confront the real barriers slowing progress. These include closing the gaps, the financing gaps, to bring down the cost of capital, unlocking investments in grids and storage, expanding energy access, navigating the messy middle of the transition with clarity and coordination, and supporting the managed, accelerated retirement of fossil fuel assets while protecting workers, communities, and the most vulnerable, and building resilient and diversified supply chains. And critically, to rebuild trust between producers and consumers, between developed and developing countries. Because without international cooperation and solidarity, this transition will be slower, more fragmented, more costly, and more unequal. So, ministers, excellencies, and friends, we are both at a moment of choice and opportunity. We can continue investing in a system that is volatile, insecure, and unequal, or we can come together, as we're doing here in Santa Marta, to build a new model of cooperation focused on solving problems, unlocking barriers, and accelerating delivery at scale. And I have a special message to my developed country friends and colleagues who are here, who are representing here today, both as producers, consumers, and as providers of finance. Lead by example. Move first, fast, and furthest. It is essential, colleagues, that this work is closely aligned with the work that is being done by our colleagues in Brazil as COP30 president, and that it is mutually supportive of this really important effort. And as the minister said, now is the time for unity. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the entire UN system, we stand ready to support your work and the critical follow-up it requires. Rest assured, we will be with you every step of the way. And let this meeting send a clear signal to citizens, markets, and investors everywhere that the direction of travel is irreversible and that this transition will be managed with purpose, partnership, and urgency. Let us make this the last fossil fuel shock, where we finally break the grip of the fossil fuel industry on our energy security and our economies, and take the first decisive step towards a clean, people-centered, secure, sovereign, and inclusive energy future for all. I thank you.
Gracias a Selvin Hart, enviado especial para la acción climática.
Thank you very much, Sensing Hard, for the weather transition. And now we're going to give a space to a voice that remembers the climate voice is coming from the territorials.
Honored to welcome Ms. Juvelis Morales, Goldman Prize laureate. Welcome to the podium.
Hola a todos y todos, compañeras.
Hello everyone, partners. For me it's such an honor today to be here speaking from the territories. Today it's a special greeting from the forest from the river that I come from, and the proud that people has from the media, from the Magdalena's River. Today we're going to have an invitation at this moment, and it's to close your eyes, to open your heart, and to imagine the world what we want to habit, from the organizations, from the territorial, from the territories, from the collectives of youth people, peasants, indigenous populations, countries from the Pacific. Today we are here in this first international conference for the transition beyond from fossil fuels. Today we are sharing the popular mandate to leave the fossil fuels behind. We have the call to make real the world that we imagine. Youth and children, we convoke you guys to contribute to direct and concrete actions, looking for a world where we're going to be able to breathe, the world where we're going to be habit, the world that children and youth deserve to live, where you guys deserve to contribute. Today, we find each other from the global south and from every single country but into a transitioning that indefinitely is the solution. The world today has told us the axes are not the fossil fuels, that today the pathway should be to take care of rivers, to take care of mountains, to take care of air, to take care of fauna and flora, and definitely the nature, and to be included in it. Today we're in the most biodiverse countries around the world. Today this country is back to life. We claim energy justice, energy, weather, climate in general. We claim justice with youth and children. That's why this moment is so important, because for the very first time the world is making an arrangement to be possible the world what we deserve. we invite you also that from this conference go out an instrument, a vinculed instrument that assures us and the communities within the territories to have an energy transition, territorial and communitary energy transition. That's why we invite you for you to use this tool, because it's going to be consolidated related to the treatment that make us to the communities a transition, that assure us to the communities to be today within the territories, talking from the territories because of security, with dignity, with territorial life. And we're going to help you out, because we are here generating not only some awareness, but not only having a call, but showing the energy transition and territorial faith one is going to be over under the territories in their countries as well, because we're not going to invent a new world, because we're making possible the new world, and that call should be surrounded from the heart. And the heart to us always will be nature. Today is convocated not only to talk and to dialogue, but to generate concrete actions to protect life. That imagines you guys the world that you want to be in, that we call all of us to be able to imagine. Thank you so much. Wow, what a great call to action. So thank you very much. And you all who is following this transmission, this is streaming live. And thank you very much for being with us in every single way for the opening of the first international transitioning away from fossil fuels. From Santa Marta, Colombia, the heart of the world, we're going to continue with the development of this agenda, which is booked today with the delegations. We invite you to be connected through our social media for you to know the agenda for this milestone, for the agenda towards and away from fossil fuels as well.
To now open the floor to the invited countries and the different chapters spokespersons to have contributed to the discussions over the past days, I want to invite Minister Vélez and Minister Van Belhoven to guide us through this segment of our dialogue. To be able to hear everyone, we will call each speaker on the list for a 2-minute intervention. We will have to be strict with the time to accomplish our objectives. There will be further opportunities for other delegations to speak at the thematic sessions and the closing plenary. So, Minister Renewables, the floor is yours.
Well, now we're gonna go to listen to the governments and the representative ones of the different chapters of sectors and populations that they have been working together during the last months as virtual as here at Santa Marta during the last week, and they as speakers, they're going to present us the conclusions and proposals for the implementation of transitioning away from fossil fuels. To get started, we'd like to get started with the Honor Ministry of Regional Minister of Nigeria to make the floor ministry.
Let me say that on behalf of the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the good people of Nigeria, I would like to thank the organizers of this very first international conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. Let me also thank the governments of Colombia and Netherlands for putting up this very excellent and impactful event. There's no doubt that this conference and the subsequent ones will create space for various actors to come together to work on solutions to implement a progressive, just, and equitable transition beyond fossil fuels. It is therefore heartwarming to see key actors here, countries, subnational governments, international organizations, academia, indigenous peoples, people of Africa, descent, peasant, parliamentarian, civil society, private sectors, and workers. The conference will also seek to highlight existing financial, physical, regulatory, and international cooperation solutions, as well as mechanisms to deliver them. I have specifically been told by the organizers at this high-level meeting to facilitate the thematic section, Face Down Fossil Fuel Extraction, later today and tomorrow morning in this very place. Yes, it is face down, not face out, that is giving room for transition and diversification to drive sustainable development. Nigeria is actively diversifying its economy away from fossil fuel dependence, which currently account for about 80% of our exports. As a party to the Paris Agreement of 2015, Nigeria strongly believes that it is not whether the extraction must decline, but how to organize the decline in a manageable, fair, and politically viable process across countries. Nigeria is already putting in place some measures to manage the phase down, such as diversification into climate-smart agriculture, renewable clean energy resources, solid minerals, etc. Nigeria's existing national framework, such as Energy Transition Plan and Nationally Determined Contributions, NDC, that have defined our pathways, is currently partnering with the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance Fund to boost agriculture, solid minerals, and manufacturing. This BOGA program is led by the Nigeria's National Climate Council, NCC, to support the implementation of Nigeria's nationally determined contribution by exploring the economic challenges of the transition away from oil and gas and developing economic diversification strategies. The Ministry of Regional Development, which I oversee, has complemented the above plans by developing an integrated climate action plan known as which was launched last year in
Thank you very much, Minister. We are going to remind you, colleagues, that we will have 2-minute interventions to allow for everyone to take the floor in this plenary, so we will be a bit strict about that. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Minister Van Veldhoven to continue with our proceedings. Thank you very much.
And we're also all getting used to the technique in the room, so thank you for bearing with us. Thank you so much, Minister, also for your willingness to co-host one of the sessions today. Much appreciated with that. I'd love to give the floor to the Minister for Home Affairs, Climate Change and Environment of Tuvalu. Minister, you have the floor.
Co-chairs, distinguished ministers, the scientific community, indigenous peoples, youth, and civil societies, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The aloha and warm greetings from the government and the people of Tuvalu. I wish to convey my sincere appreciation to the government and the people of Colombia and the city of Santa Marta for the warm hospitality being accorded to me and my delegation. At the outset, I congratulate the co-chairs of the first international conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels for their steadfast commitment in bringing this possibility to an achieving milestone. Tuvalu is like any other small island developing states. It's dependent on fossil fuel for development. In fact, it is also a country that have been consistently committed to limit its dependency on fossil fuels through engaging in renewable energy. We understand it all. The adverse impact of climate change that threatens the well-being and the livelihoods of people of Tuvalu as a result of elevated greenhouse gas emissions. These have been the driving force behind Tuvalu's commitment to engage in every possible discussions that aims to deliver the immediate solutions required. We are not gathered here today because we lack knowledge. We are here because we lack action, because we lack the will. For years, the international climate negotiations have circled around fossil fuels without directly confronting the core issues, phasing out of fossil fuels. At COP30 in Belém, we recognize efforts to include a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels, but it falls short, exposing deep divisions between countries. The science is clear and strong. The warnings have been issued. The consequences are already being felt. The question before us is no longer what is happening or even what must be done. The question whether we have the courage to act or not. Today, we are here in Santa Marta. Committed countries are gathered to identify possibilities that can enable solutions to transition away from fossil fuels. Tuvalu reaffirms its commitment to be part of the deliberations that focus on accelerated effort to advance the momentum toward an orderly, just, and fair transition away from fossil fuels. This moment in history calls to mind the story of Noah. A warning was given. Some listened, many did not. And history remembers the cost of that hesitation. But unlike that story, we do not have the excuse of ignorance. Today, every nation, every leader, every institution has access to the same information. The difference now is not knowledge, it's the will to act. From another perspective, two critical observations we can draw from the Noah narrative. First, the powerful, the wealthy countries have the purchasing ability to secure their tickets to board the ark. Second, the poor depends on the powerful who control the market ideologies to decide who receives the ticket and who does not. Countries like Tuvalu, with very limited capacity, are left to swim outside the ark. Let's not turn this process to another prolonged geopolitical deliberations, where solutions are understood but actions are withheld. Joint efforts of willing should lead the way to accelerate the momentum to deliver practical solutions. We must immediately act to tackle the fate.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to give the floor to the Excellent Vice President and Minister of the Ecological Transition of Spain to speak. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Ministry, civil society, academical world, and every single person who is here in this plenary, which is very inspired. I do think it is a really special day. I would like to get started now thanking the extraordinary job of the ministries of Colombia and the Dutch as well, and the whole land as well, because your visionary capability to attract this conference today at Santa Marta. Well, I would like to highlight there is a first conference because it's a really important conference because it's something that is coming more, and we're going to be working together because we're going to have some bridges and new alliances. And why we are here, I guess it's clear because we have a group of civil society, academical world, parliamentarians, of collective ones, indigenous populations, every single person convinced that science had been working too much time ago. The weather change is the biggest challenge in our time, so we need to react. We do need solutions, of course, solutions that are already in there. And there is a solution we need to build up among us. The solution is coming by hand of the agenda and a special route as well, beyond and away from fossil fuels, because it's a moment, it's on time, because it has been working, because we have been working, because we are seeing a new unilateral war that it has an impact, losses of lives. It's a military struggle, but it's a new fossil war. It's a fossil fuel that is added. We need to remember to the one who is existing in Europe, the Ukraine's war, that has some economical tensions, chain issues as well in our territories, and that's why I insist it's more important than ever to make action, because this is agenda, it's a climate agenda, but it's a security agenda, it's an economical agenda, it's a prosperity agenda, and it's a really deep social agenda. That's why I do believe science has met some solutions: renewable energies, electrification, planification, fair transition, innovator mechanisms to finance, some tools, fiscal tools, and all of it has to be hand by hand with the governments, the regional governments, and the civil society together. So that's why we highlight the importance, and we think to all the possibility that the two Colombian presidents and Holland as well, in order to have this position in the change of fossil fuels as well. And the Netherlands, in this case, is pretty important to place the value that we are here, 60 governments, as you were saying, but the big importance to have the civil society, to the academical world, and the indigenous and vulnerables and everybody, parliamentarians as well, the voice of women and people. Everybody is going to share some solutions and successful cases. Better is how to face together, how to strengthen international cooperation, how to reinforce the alliances, the importance to protect science, our dear self in the word saying, to protect science, that science always goes together hand by hand, alliances to build the roadmap as well. We were talking about the weather justice and social justice as well, and Spain has been coming with a successful case. Thank you very much, Minister Irene. Thank you very much. Good luck. And we have been working together, and we have too much future ahead, because we're ready against the vulnerability because of this, and to have more better sovereignty. And we need to share that example. We need to share this conference, not only be successful, but we're going to be able to feed the roadmap as well, our partners, to the presidency of Brazil, of the negotiations of the United Nations framework, and to end it up once again to thank Irene, and thank you and everyone because of your hospitality, because of your bravery, and of course I would like to get started because this conference once more been a successful case. Thank you so much.
Also for co-hosting one of the sessions. Also, Minister from Tuvalu, thank you already for being willing to co-chair some of the discussions that we'll be having here today, and thank you for underlining the need to involve all and to protect science. We will hear from some of those other voices that we will need in this process very much. The voices of the indigenous people, followed by the voices of parliamentarians around the world. So I now give the floor to the representative of the world's indigenous peoples. Please, you have the floor.
And months leading into this conference, groups from across the globe have coordinated sectors, voices, issues and peoples to articulate our positions for this important dialogue on transitioning away from fossil fuels. We were told this space could support a dialogue and process that was not possible within the UN fora. It would be better, more inclusive, and ultimately that our concerns for a fossil-free future, a just future, would finally be given the attention needed. Yet this space has not only replicated a structure of exclusion of those most impacted by fossil fuel proposals for a transition away, but has amplified the dysfunctional system driven by colonial imperialism and capitalist greed that will only accept change if there is continued profit and control. It is Indigenous peoples who have raised the alarm for decades, centuries even, to take real tangible action to change course and protect all that is sacred, all life, all systems, and all that makes us who we are. We cannot continue to accept a system that waters down the issues, our plight, our internationally recognised inherent, distinct and collective rights to usher in a new form of colonialism cloaked as a just transition. We will not stand by as our kin, our lands, our waters, territories and non-human relatives suffer to maintain the status quo. This structure will not be where we find our salvation and liberation. It will be found in our ancestral knowledge, our kinships, and we will continue to lead our peoples and the peoples of the world to a future that is truly just and fair. This is the last time it will be tokenised, used to push a state agenda, being only good for pictures and media opportunities. You want our pictures, not our voices. You want our stories, but not our struggles. We are not a tool to further entrench imperialism, colonial capitalism, or a future that does not value life. The attempts to pit us against each other, fighting for 2 minutes, is a tactic of the past that can no longer be accepted as sufficient. True solidarity with each other is a prerequisite to a just transition. We will not be undermined for the optics of false progress. The commitment to Indigenous peoples to a just transition away from fossil fuels is intergenerational and will outlast any government here. We call for greater collaboration and more serious partnerships into Tuvalu. Grima.
Muchísimas gracias a la representante.
Thank you very much to the representative of the indigenous populations. We would like to remind you one of the new aspects of this conference is precisely the dialogue that we are establishing within the social sectors and populations as well. That's why we think to come here with the voice that represents the indigenous populations around the world. Now we're going to give the floor, please, to the representative of the parliamentarians.
Colleagues, I have parliamentarians from 40 countries engaged through the parliamentary chapter of this conference. And our message is clear. The transition away from fossil fuels must now move from ambition to implementation. Across regions, there is broad agreement that dependence on fossil fuels must be reduced. But ambition alone is not enough. This transition will only succeed if it's anchored in laws, public budgets, oversight, and long-term national frameworks. Parliaments are not observers. We are implementers. And our discussions highlighted the central barrier, the fiscal dependency trap. In many countries, public revenues remain deeply tied to fossil fuels. And without reforming these fiscal structures, the transition will remain politically and economically constrained. And this is not only an energy transition, it is a transformation of economic systems. A just transition requires financial systems that expand fiscal space, not deepen debt. And developing countries cannot transition under conditions of increasing indebtedness. And we call for reform of international financial systems, agreements and treaties to enable predictable, accessible and non-debt-inducing finance and protect policy space for climate action and support technology transfer and capacity. There is no one-size-fits-all pathway. The transition must reflect different national realities while ensuring fairness and shared responsibility. A just transition is not only a national issue, it is a matter of global equity and cooperation. Santa Marta must mark a turning point, from commitment to implementation, from fragmented efforts to coordinated action, and from dependency to resilient, sustainable economies. Parliamentarians stand ready to act. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this contribution, because indeed, parliamentarians, you are the lawmakers of the world. So fantastic to have your message here that you are ready to act. With that, I'd like to invite the Federal Minister of Mobility, Climate and Ecological Transition in charge of sustainable development of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to give his intervention. Also, thank you for being willing to co-host one of the sessions later on. Minister, the floor is yours.
We speak in French. Chers collègues, chers commissaires, Excellences, félicitations à la Colombie, à Irène, dont je me souviens.
Ministers, Excellencies, thank you for this invitation. I'm so pleased to see that there are solutions that it's a fact nowadays. I would like to congratulate the Netherlands. I would like to congratulate we always make mistakes, but in this case we are right. We can see that the price of fossil fuels, it's not a reality. It's not a theory, it's a reality. We cannot be disencouraged. I think we have to be. We need to work with this crisis. We need to live. We know what we have to do because Dubai 2023 told us what are the pathway, and this is what we are working. We're working towards development, towards wills, towards realism. And what we have seen, we can see that the risks, that the solutions, we wanted to reinforce sustainable, and we wanted to emphasize that active multilateralism and sustainable energy, it's a solution for Belgium. This is not only a desire, this is a priority to be able to ensure a value chain, to achieve to an equitable consultations, and that reduces fossil fuel emissions, and to be able to have a fair transition. Nowadays, we have a hope that allows us to talk to the ones that are and that are not there and that are going to be with us. So we don't have another option, and that's why our idea, it's because we work together, and today it's the strength of us all. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite the Highness here of Tourism in the Middle East of Maldives.
For the Maldives, our challenge is not only fossil fuel production, it is fossil fuel dependence. As a small import-dependent island state, our electricity systems, transport, water production, fisheries, tourism, and essential services are built around imported fuels. When global disruptions occur, the impacts are immediate and economic-wide. Energy insecurity quickly becomes economic insecurity, affecting livelihoods, food, water systems, and social stability. This is why energy access must be understood more broadly. It is not just about electricity. It is about enabling development, strengthening resilience, and safeguarding sovereignty. However, transitioning away from fossil fuels is not a simple substitution. Our existing infrastructure, our grids, transport systems, and institutions were designed for fossil fuel-based systems. Many of our island grids are diesel-based and not equipped to absorb high shares of renewable energy without risking its stability. Therefore, the transition must be system-wide. It must include investments in critical enablers, modern grids, storage, energy management systems, decentralized solutions, and resilient infrastructure. Without these, renewable energy targets alone will not deliver reliable or sustainable outcomes. And these enablers require adequate, predictable, and accessible finance. Access to finance remains one of our greatest barriers. For countries like the Maldives, finance must be concessional and, where possible, grant-based. Aligned with national circumstances, respecting our governance systems, culture, and development priorities, free from undue conditionalities or prescriptive approaches. And importantly, it must not add to existing debt burdens or negatively impact our credit ratings, which already fail to capture our vulnerabilities. Climate finance must not become a burden. It must be an enabler. It must not dictate pathways. It must support nationally determined transitions. The transition must also support economic diversification. It is not enough to reduce emissions. We must create new opportunities, build local industries, strengthen value chains, and reduce dependence on a narrow economic base. At the same time, transport must be fully integrated. For the Maldives, maritime and aviation connectivity are lifelines. Any transition pathway that does not account for these risks undermine our connectivity, trade, and livelihoods. Equally, climate action must be integrated across food systems, water security, tourism, and fisheries. In SIDS context, these systems are deeply interconnected. A transition that weakens one will undermine all. Co-chairs, the roadmap for this transition must be practical and time-bound. It cannot remain at the level of high-level commitments. It must identify implementable actions across different time horizons. Immediate actions can begin now, medium-term reforms and investments over the next 5 to 10 years, and long-term transformation over the next 30, 50 to 100 years. Finally, this transition must be guided by equity and principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of national circumstances. Vulnerable countries should not be asked to carry the cost of transition they did not cause and cannot finance alone. For the Maldives, transitioning away from fossil fuels is not just about energy. It is about building a more resilient, secure, and diversified future. We stand ready to work with all partners to ensure this transition is not only ambitious, but also just, inclusive, and achievable that leaves no one behind. I thank you.
Dear Minister, thank you so much for pressing on this system-wide change that at the same time has to deliver for everybody. Thank you for so much. We'll now hear two interventions, one from the peoples of African descent and then one from the academic chapter. So I'm happy to give the floor now to the spokesperson of the people from African descent. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Jo Banner, and I'm here representing the peoples of African descent. Thank you for your time. Afro-descended communities are dispersed across continents due to the ongoing legacies of chattel slavery, colonialism, and systemic racism that expose our people to disproportionate impacts from the drivers of the global climate crisis. These include, but are not limited to, the extraction, production, and funded dependency on fossil fuels. Rooted in extractive capitalism and environmental racism stemming from the plantation system that enslaved our ancestors, the climate crisis and fossil fuels exacerbate existing inequalities and threaten the livelihoods, health, and cultural heritage of Black Afro-descended communities globally, with particular harm to Black Afro-descended women, oppressed communities, and differently abled peoples and biodiversity. This is not a case of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. For Afro-descendants, thanks to corporate capture, fossil fuel harm is in our backyards, our front porches, our schools, our churches, our biodiversity, and our cemeteries, where many of our family and friends are buried prematurely. As a collective of Afro-descendants, we have agreed that this transition must include the following solutions at a minimum: the legal recognition and protection of all collective space inhabited by Afro-descended communities, urban and rural, a guarantee of the effective enjoyment of rights and a strengthening of autonomous territorial economies of Afro-descendants that sustain life and conservation, the promotion of self-governed energy communities of Afro-descendants, peoples, and communities with sovereignty over the land and natural resources so that we can generate our own and distribute our own clean energy. Fair environmental licensing and protection of Afro-descendant territories and marine areas against extractivism and militarism. Transforming global climate governance with binding participation and recognition of traditional Afro-descendant practices and self-governed structures. Participating in multilateral processes such as the Global Plastics Treaty to ensure all harms from fossil fuels such as petrochemicals are addressed, and aligning financing, cooperation, and accountability with a just transition based on territories, traditional knowledge, and historical justice with a guarantee and fulfillment of substantive and expansive reparations for Afro-descendant peoples.
Muchas gracias. Ahora en vocería.
Now, as the spokesman of the academic, I'm going to give the word to Professora Cardoso. I want to salute
in Santa Marta, the proud host of the academic chapter of this conference. We, as a university, experience and study the consequences of the closures of 2 coal mines without any plan for the workers and communities. So the results of this conference advise on how to transition away from fossil fuels have a lot of the meaning for the people in Santa Marta and the region. It is an honor to briefly share the process behind this academic dialogue which serves as a key scientific pillar of this conference. We brought together more than 400 researchers from around the world in 16 parallel work streams, including leading scholars and senior experts on energy transition. This academic dialogue was designed as a complementary space to the scientific panel for the global energy transition, with diverse, grounded, and plural perspectives for researchers across many countries. This diversity is extremely valuable, and we see great potential for a stronger connection between both processes in the future to support the government in transition away from fossil fuels. The output of this collective effort, we call it the 12 action in science, and summaries of the 16 work streams are publicly available on the conference website. These insights cover policy options to transition away from fossil fuels in demand and supply, with an emphasis on economic prosperity and social equity. We warmly invite governments, delegates, and stakeholders to use this material as a reference. As an actionable proposal for this conference, we are recommending, among other things, to act on central banks, fossil methane, ISDIs, national transition away from fossil fuel roadmaps, fossil-free zones, and the health benefits on overcoming fossil fuels. This process reflects the scientific rigor, the collaboration, and also I want to emphasize that we put so much effort into including the epistemologies of the South in this process. Even more can be done in the future on the inclusion of other epistemologies.
So I want to... Thank you so much for that contribution and for sharing these learnings. We'll all be very excited to learn more about the process. Thank you also for underlining the need to start thinking about the central banks and the other recommendations that you made. It's been said a couple of times here, the science is clear, not just, I would say, on the side of the risks, but also on the side of the opportunities. And I think we can see that definitely the economic case is now slowly starting to tip in our favor. So who better to invite to speak more about this than Mr. Gilles Kortenhorst, co-chair of the Energy Transition Commission. Please come forward and speak to us about the latest finding of the ETC. The floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world is addicted to fossil fuels, fuels that produce 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. But we keep telling ourselves the wrong story about fossil fuels, overstating the size of the challenge. We keep repeating that fossil fuels supply 80% of global energy. It sounds overwhelming. It suggests that the energy transition will be slow, difficult, even unrealistic. But that 80% actually hides more than it reveals, because it mixes productive energy and energy waste. Today, the world consumes 170,000 terawatt hours of primary energy, but only 64,000 of that becomes useful energy, the services that people want. Nearly 60% of that primary energy is lost in inefficiencies, mostly as waste heat from burning fossil fuels. And what we have seen in the last 2 months is that fossil fuel system is not just inefficient, but also inherently unstable and insecure. 3/4 of the world's population live in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels, supplied by only a few exporting countries. Most economies depend on fossil fuels they do not control, priced in markets that they do not influence, and thus vulnerable to shocks they cannot prevent. So this is the reality. We've built an energy system that is wasteful, insecure, and volatile. But the good news is that system is changing very fast. Let's look at 7 facts that illustrate how fast change is happening. First of all, clean electrification changes the equation entirely. It allows us to deliver the same services with far less energy input, avoiding the inefficiencies of combustion. Analysis shows that we can double GDP by 2050 and at the same time reduce overall energy demand while increasing energy services. Fact 1, electric cars go 3 times as far on the same energy input. Fact 2, heat pumps deliver 3 to 4 times more heat than traditional gas boilers. Solar and wind, fact 3, are now the cheapest forms of new power generation globally. They met all of the new electricity demand just last year. And even if we add batteries, renewables are often cost competitive with fossil fuels. And there is no longer a question of whether you can make grids work with high levels of wind and solar. Fact 4, electricity systems in Poland, Portugal, Denmark, California, Namibia, the UK are already operating at 50 to 80% of renewable power and moving higher. Fact 5, all these technologies are already cost effective today and rapidly becoming cheaper. EVs are cheaper to purchase than fossil fuel-fired cars in China and 3 times more efficient because they run cheaper. In fact, in China last year, more than 50% of new cars and surprisingly 30% of new trucks that were sold were electric. And China is now selling these carbon technologies around the world, even more today than 3 months ago. Fact 6, Chinese solar exports doubled in March over February alone. You heard that correctly. Solar exports from China doubled last month. Of course, it is not all easy. There are sectors of the economy that will be harder to electrify, where oil, coal still may dominate in the phase and will take longer to phase out. Think of steel, cement, fertilizer, and plastics. But even in these sectors, the cost gap is closing and innovation is accelerating. And therefore, fact 7, electricity can displace 75% of fossil fuel demand, so we are only talking about the last 25% in these hard-to-abate sectors. For the fossil fuel industry, this means that global demand is certain to drop in the very near future, something the industry does not see coming. We clearly see that on the basis of these trends, global oil and gas demand can already be reduced by 20% by the end of this decade. So it will become clear that we do not need continued fossil fuel exploration to meet future demand. Some limited investment is required to maintain existing supply and avoid short-term disruption. But the central lever is not just supply, it is very much also demand. And because of the pace of the transition will be determined by how quickly we scale the clean energy future, I believe that we are on a very encouraging path. If you want more of these facts, you can find this leaflet on your way out. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, excelentes datos, inspiradores.
Wonderful data. I wanted to give the word to the Commission of Climate and Net Zero and Clean Energy from the European Union. Commissioner Hoekstra.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, truly great pleasure to see you all here in beautiful Colombia in Santa Marta. Great pleasure, but also a great necessity. Let me first thank the co-chairs of the conference, Colombia and the Netherlands, dear ministers, dear Irene, dear Stintje, for having us here. Truly remarkable that you have pulled this off. And dear Anna, let me also thank Brazil and you personally for your commitment, because this is hugely important to have the opportunity. We all know that, although we wish otherwise, the COP process is unfortunately not always delivering what it should. So that means we need to improve that, but at the same time we also need to make sure we make the most of these type of plurilateral initiatives. That simply is the name of the game. So therefore truly very much appreciate to have this staff roadmap. Ladies and gentlemen, let me reiterate what others have said as well. Science matters. It matters in medicine, It matters in chemistry, it matters in physics, and it certainly matters in the domain of climate change. And transitioning away from fossil fuels is a very tangible way to follow science. And actually, that is what inspired so many of us to agree to the Dubai Consensus, to transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. That is what the whole world has signed up to. And now, 3 years on, the energy crisis is, in fact, a reality check. We in Europe, and the same figures will be all around the world, we in Europe are losing €500 million each day this war continues. 1 day in Colombia, €500 million, 2 days in Colombia, €1 billion. But the effects are everywhere. And we already had a very good reason to move on for climate action with transitioning away. We now also have it for commercial reasons and for reasons of independence. So let's move forward. Let's make sure we focus on the short, the medium, and the long term. Let's link this to global stocktake emissions. Let's link it to 1.5, and let's make the most of this endeavor. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Wopke, for underlining indeed the acute bill of this energy crisis and also what we save if we know how to transition away. We would now like to welcome the Minister for Climate Change, Adaptation, Energy, Environment, Meteorology, Geohazards and Disaster Management of the Republic of Vanuatu. And I think this collection of all your portfolios shows what an integral question it is that we're tackling here today. Minister, you have the floor.
Firstly, Vanuatu would like to take the opportunity to thank Colombia and the Netherlands for convening this first international conference. We're very grateful that this space has been created for those countries most dedicated to addressing the most urgent problem of our times, those countries who will become front runners in doing what is not only legally required, but scientifically imperative. Vanuatu recently hosted a Pacific Small Island Developing States Ministerial Dialogue on the global just transition, where several of our leaders collectively affirmed our shared vision for a fossil fuel-free Pacific and clearly articulated our demand for a global mechanism to manage a just, orderly, equitable and rapid phase-out of coal, oil and gas. That's because we cannot do this alone. Ceasing fossil fuel expansion, ending subsidies, addressing petrochemicals and managing the decline of production is not the Pacific's problem, but it is a collective problem that requires urgent and bold multilateral action. That is why the International Court of Justice's landmark advisory opinion on climate change considered international cooperation as indispensable in the field of climate change and clarifies that the customary duty to cooperate for the protection of the environment is inherent to states' obligations under international law. We all know that this convening arose out of our collective frustration at the continuing failure of the UNFCCC process to address the root cause of the problem, which is the production of fossil fuels, even as we try to reduce emissions. This first conference therefore responds to a clear gap in the international climate governance framework, which is the absence of a binding international framework governing fossil fuel production and phase-out. As a coalition of willing nations, we need to address the demand and supply of fossil fuels, and this can only be done with international cooperation. This new separate track of negotiations on this specific mandate, begun here in Santa Marta, must continue and must be carried forward with commitments and outcomes made here feeding back into and bolstering the UNFCCC process and other multilateral processes. We support Tuvalu's leadership for hosting the next conference and look forward to welcoming you all to the Pacific. We are here to discuss solutions, but it is of prime importance that these solutions do not add additional burdens to those who are most affected. Solutions need to be built on the foundations of justice, recognizing that the structural inequality of the global order is a key pillar of our continuing fossil fuel dependency. I challenge us to reclaim the political imagination that current frameworks lack, so that when we leave here, we do so with hope. Hope as well as real concrete actions for collective action. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por traer esas voces.
Thank you so much for bringing the voice of the Pacific. And now I would like to give the floor to the Ministry of Farming, Fishery and Environment from Palau.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Palau congratulates the government of Colombia and the Kingdom of the Netherlands for convening this first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. Palau extends its sincere gratitude for the warm hospitality of the Colombian government in its hosting of this event. This gathering of committed coalition to transition away from and phase out of fossil fuel is absolutely needed now more than ever. Excellencies, the science is unequivocal. Without addressing fossil fuel supply, the world will exceed 1.5 degrees. This is not only a climate crisis, it is a crisis of economic dependence, public health, and human vulnerability. This month alone, several Pacific Island countries were hit by 4 major cyclones reaching every corner of the Pacific. We are also entering what may become one of the strongest Super El Niño events on record. These impacts are not isolated disasters. They are symptoms of a global system still dependent on fossil fuels. That is why Palau is here with a singular purpose: to accelerate emission reductions and address the root cause of the climate crisis, the supply of fossil fuel. While the UNFCCC remains our primary forum, discussion within it are deadlocked on fossil fuel production, and this paralysis has allowed major emitters to delay meaningful actions. This conference is our opportunity to change that through the development of a new pathway that fosters and reinforces cooperation to address systematic barriers and unlock opportunities to free ourselves from fossil fuel dependency. Like many seats, for Palau to transition away from fossil fuels require innovative, long-term pragmatic solutions that sustain progress over time. These include, but not limited to, blended finance that can be reinvested in renewable energy. Transforming fossil fuel demand involves creating technology deployment through exchange hub, strengthening workforce development, and ensuring clean energy systems that match local capacities in tandem with putting in place mechanisms to phase out the supply of fossil fuel. To build on this momentum of the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels, Palau supports Tuvalu's proposal to host the second conference. Santa Marta is our chance to close governance gap and shape a future where no country is left to transition alone.
Thank you so much, Minister, for that contribution. We will now hear interventions from Women and Diversities and from Multilateral Development Banks. So let me please give the floor to the representative of the Women and Diversities chapter. Please, you have the floor.
Buenos días.
Good morning. My name is Diana. I'm a Colombian woman, and I represent the women's diversity sector. We are here gathered with the support of our ancestors that died waiting for clean waters, and we want to affirm with clarity and ethics that we can envision a future that doesn't succumb to the narrative of collapse. It's a fair transition. It's not to change the sources of energy. It's to transform the rules of the game. It's to make energy democracy. It's to decentralize control and to acknowledge it as a right, not as a good. It's to place life at the center. We question the model, even the model that arises from the green speeches that still reproduce exclusion. Please act now. Act now towards a change that embeds social justice, that acknowledges the experience of the communities and the leadership of the women that resist war and rebuild communities. It's a fair with gender justice. This should be the first way to this transition. We wanted to reduce, represent, compensate, and redistribute care that acknowledges territorial and biocultural knowledge of the communities. We see the nature barbarism. That's why we think the reparative justice should take care of the historical birth of the global north, that it's based on militarist, sexist, and racist systems, and they need to acknowledge the communities that have been affected by fossil fuels, by petrochemicals, by mining. They should prioritize the needs and the demands of women and the peoples in the accelerated phasing out of fossil fuels and also the post-op of that transition. We demand respect, sovereignty, energy autonomy with a binding commitment and also transparency to avoid false solutions. We want to call you, states of the world, to eliminate the barriers towards the cancellation of the debt, the public funding, the reduction of military expenses.
Muchas gracias a la representante.
Thank you very much to the representative of women, and we're talking about transforming the game rules, the financial system, and debts. I would like to give the floor to the representative of the multilateral banks of development. Well, ministries and representatives, colleagues.
Dutch Development Bank, FMO, I'm pleased to report that the multilateral development banks and development financial institutions, we are part of this conference. We're part of rich and constructive dialogue. And first and foremost, I would like to confirm that we are partners and remain committed partners to governments and the private sector on the work to navigate the short-term impacts of the current geopolitical and economic disruptions and the long-term transition away from fossil fuel dependency. Our guiding objectives are energy security, affordability, and sustainability. MDBs and DFIs, we have a large and proven toolbox of instruments, including recently innovations in the field policy support, concessional financing guarantees, risk mitigation, and investment mobilization. Priority now should be to deploy and replicate and get to scale and workable solutions based on country context and real work experience. Two examples we want to highlight is targeting subsidies to those who really need it. We can provide technical and financial support to governments and business to deal with the short-term impact of fossil price shocks through targeted, transparent, and temporary support, and doing this in a way that does not exacerbate existing market distortions, protects the poor and vulnerable, and is aligned with the long-term energy transition pathway. Accelerating the electrification and strengthening power systems to support energy efficiency, demand response, and integration of renewables and flexibility for a long-term transition away from fossil dependency. Our final remarks. The choice of action must be country-led, tailored to the country's unique context and needs, including energy and technology mix, regulatory structure, institutional capacity, and existing social protection systems, and importantly, its economic and social realities. There is a scope for closer coordination. We can do better, and we can do better in particular to improve the speed and scale of our delivery. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that confirmation of your partnership, the call for creativity. We can do better. Let's look at what we can do. Thank you so much for being here. And now let me go to the State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety of the Federal Republic of Germany. And before I give you the floor, Jochen, I talked about this before. It's also sometimes a story of personal commitment to be on this journey. And I know Jochen has been on this journey for a long time. I want to thank you for your personal commitment to follow up on all of these issues, not just in Germany, but also abroad. Jochen, you have the floor.
Kind words. And colleagues and friends, so great to be here in Santa Marta, just a couple of months, weeks after Berlin, and under your leadership, Irene and Stintje. So looking at the podium, the future is non-fossil, and the future is female, by the way. And I don't want to repeat what has eloquently been said before. I agree to everything. Hormuz, prior to that, Russian war of invasion in Ukraine. All this, in my view and in my conviction, is a real turning point. And we already could smell it in Berlin. it was there already. It was quite unlikely, to be honest, to get a decision there with unanimity, but thanks to Anna and the team, great that you capitalized on this atmosphere in Belém and starting the roadmap. And thanks to you, the two countries, to take over and organize this conference. So yes, our countries will be more resilient without fossils, with transition away, what many have said before. What can we do here together? And I think it is basically to exchange experiences and also to get rid of fake news. By the way, also one of the good things from Belém to organize this alliance on information integrity. Where are our countries? What are we doing? Just let me briefly say about Germany. I heard in Australia when I visited Chris Bowen there, Germany is going back to coal and nuclear, and we want to kill our emission trading system. All this is not true. It didn't come from Chris Bowen, by the way, but it's what I heard there. And so what we did, we decided 2019 to phase out coal. We have already done more than halfway. We were coming from 40 gigawatt. Now we are at 15 gigawatt already now. And we will be quite there already 2030, maybe a few years later with only a very limited part of coal. And the same will happen with gas. So our message from our experience is start early. If we would have done it earlier, it would have been cheaper economically and also politically. The other thing is there is no one size fits all. There are countries dependent on coal, but where it is already now beneficial to move away from coal or gas.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. We invite to the floor to the State Secretariat of the Weather and the Norway.
Chairs, Excellencies, colleagues, there is it working. First, let me join others by expressing our appreciation for the invitation to take part in this important conference. As many had said before me, the science is clear. The global climate and energy transition is needed to keep 1.5 within reach. The transition is also wanted because it creates jobs, is good for our economies, and contributes to energy security. All countries joined in shared understanding on this in Dubai in 2023. Since then, renewables have grown far beyond expected. But we are yet to unlock the potential in the transition across all sectors, continents, and for all people. As a significant energy producer of both oil and gas and renewable energy, Norway is strongly committed to the transitioning away from fossil fuels and into the era of renewables. This needs to be happening in close coordination between all producers and consumers, since energy markets are strongly connected and interdependent. The current situation demonstrates this with clarity. The task ahead of us is daunting, but we need to take the steps together. This conference aims to offer a unique space for us to share our experiences and learn from each other, and I look forward to engaging in-depth on solutions that can take us to a global pathway where we keep 1.5 within reach. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And now we come to a special contribution by Professor Dr. Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute, contributing something very concrete to this conference with a remarkable initiative. Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, gathered ministers, excellencies, Stintje, Irene, all fellow friends and colleagues. The world will, as we now know scientifically, inevitably breach the long-term 1.5 degrees Celsius limit within the coming decade, pushing us into overshoot where every tenth of a degree means suffering for millions of people and where we come dangerously close to potentially unmanageable tipping points. Science shows that coming back to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still possible, but it requires system transformations at scale and accelerating transitions away from fossil fuels. I would like to start by confirming the urgency expressed by Selving Hart and for the accelerated transition required away from fossil fuels. Number one, the evidence now shows that global warming is not only increasing, it's accelerating, indicating for the first time that Earth is losing the capacity to buffer the heat imbalance we are causing. The climate crisis is deepening fast. Two, exponential rise of fossil fuel-free technologies and solutions that make green electrification real, scalable, and competitive, just like Jules Kortenhorst just showed, can replace oil, coal, and gas. This is a new revolution we're facing right as we speak. And number three, the current global energy crisis that provides overwhelming support for the value of accelerating the pathway towards energy independence and more resilient nations. To support the world, sectors, countries, and regions on the journey away from danger, we have launched, here in Santa Marta, the Science Panel for the Global Energy Transition. The idea of the Science Panel was born at COP30 in Belém in a dialogue between science and Anatoni and the COP presidency. Professor Carlos Nobre from University of São Paulo and myself were asked to explore the idea. The objectives of Spaghetti, as we are calling it, is to provide 4 areas of scientific guidance for decision-making, basically for your journey away from fossil fuels. Number one, updated scientific roadmaps and benchmarks from now, year by year, until 2035, across sectors, scales from global, region to nations, to enable us to follow science-aligned paths in an orderly transition away from fossil fuels that keeps 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And remember, all roadmaps aligned with the return to 1.5 degrees Celsius, allowing for an orderly phase out of fossil fuels, require massive efforts beyond oil, coal, and gas alone. To stay within the remaining global carbon budget requires global emission reductions of at least 5% per year globally to have a chance of coming back to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But even this momentous challenge will only be sufficient if assumptions of massive carbon dioxide removal of carbon dioxide come to fruition and that the global agricultural system transitions from source to sink. It is a systems transformation. It is complex. It requires science guidance. The most urgent step, though, to kickstart this journey, which we all recognize in this room, I think, is the transition away from fossil fuels. The second objective, reviews of the most effective and socially acceptable policy packages to succeed in your journey, in our journey. Number three, mapping of scalable technologies and barriers to scaling. And finally, perhaps most importantly, assessing the financial mechanisms and governance structures that can unlock the constraints and make the transitions realistic. This entire scientific structure will have an active interface with a stakeholder advisory group from all forms of voices of experience across the world. The Science Panel is a global common good, set up to serve countries and the global climate process under the UNFCCC and beyond. We will complement the foundational role of the IPCC in advancing the scientific consensus by providing scientific inputs to decision-making every year in a faster pace. It will create credible, light-footed bridge between countries and scientific guidance enabling this acceleration of a transition away from fossil fuels. It is so reassuring for us to have received such strong support from the Colombian and Dutch governments and the leadership here in Santa Marta. It is nothing less than overwhelming. This is indeed a launch pad. I have, as a scientist, never felt so encouraged at this moment of my professional endeavor. We are committed. We are here to serve in the journey ahead. The panel will now start working as of tomorrow morning to provide policy-relevant scientific contributions that can support successful transitions. Already for COP31, we aim to provide the first concrete input on updated 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned pathways that minimize overshoot, realistic pathways, and surveys of the most effective policy strategies to succeed. As you have already heard from Professor Andrea Cardosa-Diaz, the scientific community turned out in force here in Santa Marta, demonstrating a deep commitment to pull up our sleeves and feed the most up-to-date and relevant scientific knowledge into your efforts here in Santa Marta. This partnership between science and countries committed to transitioning away from fossil fuels has great potential, and we scientists are committed to work with you, hand in hand, for a just and orderly transition. The Science Panel is an offer to build this bridge for the long term. We're here to serve, to contribute, ensure that the transition away from fossil fuels not only moves from commitments to delivery, but actually, personally like to say, that it never again disappears from the global climate policy arena. We wish you good luck. Science is on your side. You are the light in a tunnel of darkness. I thank you, and let's work together.
Qué palabras más emocionantes tener.
What amazing words to have science by our side and to know that we're building up a light within this pathway or darkness, of course, certainly because of the emissions generated by the fossil fuels. Now we're going to listen to the private sector and particularly speaking at this moment from the NGOs.
Excellencies, Ministers, thank you to the governments of Colombia and the Netherlands for inviting the private sector to participate frankly and transparently. The private sector is not here to ask whether the transition is possible. We're already delivering it. Companies like Fortescue are investing in renewable generation, transmission, storage, mobility, green fuels, and new industrial supply chains. The solutions are real. The capital is real. Delivery has started, but we cannot do it alone. We need to be honest about what this transition really is. This is not just an energy transition, swapping old energy out with new. This is an entire systems transformation, as Johan said. It is a different way of powering economies, building industries, moving goods, creating markets, and supporting communities. And that is why roadmaps matter. But roadmaps cannot be slogans with dates attached. If they are to survive short political and corporate cycles, they must be just, credible, and investable. They must tell the private sector where to allocate capital, what incentives will apply, what financial instruments will exist, how communities will be engaged, and how new industries will connect to markets and supply chains. Without that certainty, Excellencies, capital waits. With it, capital moves. Everything starts with levelling the playing field. The private sector cannot be expected to decarbonise quickly while fossil fuels are made artificially cheap. Fossil fuel subsidy reform is absolutely critical. It must be sequenced, it must protect low-income households, and it must be politically durable. This starts, Excellencies, with honesty about the full scale of support that the fossil fuels establishment still receives, as the Netherlands is doing through its subsidy inventory. It also means getting real about the use of finite public resources. In Australia, the debate over capping the diesel fuel rebate for big mining companies goes to the heart of the problem.
Thank you, Roman, for clarifying, underlining that it starts with transparency and also that capital will move if we give a sense of direction to capital. I'd love to now give the floor to the spokesperson of the NGOs. Please, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I am Janet Milongo from Climate Action Network International, representing the NGO sector. The fossil fuel era is ending, but how it ends is a choice. A managed, equitable, funded transition in line with 1.5C goal, or collapse made worse by extraction and predatory finance. We need to phase out production, consumption, and the predatory finance architecture. We note with concern that the extensive contributions of civil society are weakened and reduced to near technocratic approaches. We look forward to our full contributions being reflected in the report of the conference. We will ensure that in the next 2 days, the demands of the people are strongly reflected. We need non-debt creating climate finance because no nation should take on new debt for the transition. We demand public grant-based climate finance, cancellation of global south debt, and social protection for impacted communities. We demand no new oil, gas, or coal, exploration or expansion, including offshore. We call for the establishment of permanent fossil fuel exclusion zones in biologically and culturally vital territories. We call for reparations for all affected peoples. No false solutions. They only enable continued extraction and divest critical finance away from real solutions and from a renewable energy-based economy. End fossil fuel subsidies, advertising, lobbying, and sponsorship, and break the industry's political and cultural power. We call for a legally binding treaty for a right-based and funded transition away from fossil fuels, an urgent exit from investor-state dispute settlement, and preventing the fossil fuel industry capture of multilateral processes. Be the governments that choose to exit the fossil age with courage and not excuses and rhetoric. Thank you.
Gracias por la contribución.
Thank you very much for your contributions for the MGOs. I'm going to give the floor to the Special Center for the Weather of the United Kingdom, Rachel Kites.
The co-hosts for convening us here in Santa Marta. The origin story of this conference is in our steady but outpaced progress that we have been making in climate negotiations over many years. But we now meet at a critical time. It would be irresponsible to ignore the second fossil fuel crisis in 5 years, one that signals, once and for all, that this crisis proves that the instability and insecurity that comes from our reliance on fossil fuels really has to end. In the UK, we have phased out coal in 2024. This year alone, we have consented 14.7 gigawatts of clean power, and in response to the current crisis, we're going further and faster, doubling down, not reversing, with new support for solar heat pumps, electric vehicles, making electrification more affordable and easier for our people and our businesses. Looking ahead, we are on an ambitious pathway, captured in our NDC, which commits us to 81% reduction by 2035 in emissions, our plans to get to clean power by 2030 and deliver on our carbon budgets, and our plan to enable a just transition in the North Sea. We're considering how best to tell the story of how we got here and the story of how we plan to execute on the challenges still ahead, and be able to share that with this process and with the roadmap agreed that we expect the COP presidency to produce before COP31. So how do we respond to these crises together, launching our work here at Santa Marta? We want to work with all countries and partners who are here on the most challenging issues, including, for example, those in emerging markets and developing economies, especially those who are producers that are dependent on the reserves or the revenues from fossil fuels. How can we help countries who are in a very difficult position plan, as my Nigerian friend said, to be able to manage their way through the transition? How do we understand the fiscal pressures and the economic impacts of these kinds of transitions? Obviously, looking for help from Johan and everybody else involved in spaghetti, I understand it's now called. So we have a problem of debt, we have a problem of social stability, economic insecurity, we have a problem of energy planning, and we have a problem to produce more green electrons quickly, because we cannot switch off the dirty electrons until people have the green electrons that they need. Finally, we're very pleased to see Indigenous peoples and local communities represented in this room. Thank you, Colombia in particular, and to other stakeholders. Whatever process we follow from this moment on, it will be important that Indigenous peoples' views are represented in what is the next stage of an extraordinary transition and transformation of our economy. The prize of getting this right is significant. Energy security, safer communities, safer countries, cleaner air, better jobs, well-paid jobs for all of our young people. We are ready to work together to make that a reality for everyone.
Thank you so much, Rachel, both for the ambition of the UK, but also for your willingness to start tackling the difficult questions together as you outlined them. I'd now like to invite Her Excellency Mrs. Christina Stasia, Climate Envoy of the Marshall Islands, to take the floor. Please, go ahead.
I bring you greetings of Yahweh from the Marshall Islands, from very far away. And it's that distance that leaves my people terribly exposed to the current fossil fuel crisis. We have declared a state of emergency in my country. Our government now shuts down at 3 p.m. every day to save energy. And as the crisis continues, we have to consider further cuts, such as possibly stopping construction of seawalls that are being built to keep us safe from rising seas. So we are doing all we can, but we can't solve our problems alone. They are my beliefs in the UN system. This week in the IMO, we have the chance to progress decarbonization of the shipping sector, and I ask all of you to support the net zero framework there. We also believe in high ambition coalitions. That's why I'm proud to announce that the Marshall Islands is joining the Netherlands as co-chair for the Coalition on Phasing Out Fossil Fuel Incentives, including subsidies. For us, the work of COFIS is vital in tackling the trillions in taxpayer subsidies to a sector currently announcing outrageous profits in the face of the pain and suffering of people around the world. We invite all countries to join us. Just as back in Paris when the High Ambition Coalition came together to fight for 1.5, and I'm so delighted to see many of our hack friends here in this room, this is another inflection point for ambition. In Belém, I shared a press conference with colleagues across the many initiatives represented here, pushing for a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels. And thanks to the leadership of Colombia and the Netherlands and many others, we can now help make that a reality. In the Pacific, we want a regional roadmap tied to financing solutions that lead us to a 100% clean and secure renewables future. 3 years ago in Dubai, we agreed to transition away from fossil fuels, an agreement born in the Pacific and shared with the world by our leaders at the Pacific Island Forum. I cannot wait for the movement to return to the Pacific in Tuvalu and to work with all of you so the next fossil fuel crisis doesn't hit home. Como tada, and thank you.
Le doy ahora la palabra a el representante.
I'm going to give the word to the representative of the peasants and some other social sectors here represented.
Este texto no solo reúne el pensamiento.
This text is not only just our thoughts, we're the representative of our day by day who is sitting the souls as well through the territories and to foster the traditional education as a value and technologies alive like to the alternative to the world. Are the peasants people with special rights, the protections, and that's why we declare and we demand that these methodologies will be directed to a transition to the fossil fuels as well, will be based on implementation of environmental justice linked to anti-colonial practices for the agriculture reforms, and its particularly, for example, facing the access and usage of tenants of landscapes as well, and natives, and who guarantees not only the sovereignty and food alimentary and the survival of the towns through the peace with nature. That will be comprehended the territorials as well around the world are diverse and particular from the cultures that are under their uses and cultures as well in their relationship as well as dialogue and weathers and the diverse geographical so this the general so with the peasants around the world. They're vetted by the gas and olive oils and seeds, of course, in a massive way for the fertility of the soils as well for their practicals as well monocultures and instructions degradation because of the soil softwares and the high chemical loading that it has. It has to be treated in a traditional way. We clarify the energy transition is a reality from our territories, rivers and seas and ancestors. They have been recognized and recovered from the native seas as well. Anthropology as a relevant practice. We preserve the worldwide representatives. We have also that the peasant, which have access and the landscapes in different parts of the world. They have been taken because of the extractivism in operational, because of the green energies and sustainable internal painting by the Eolic Spark as well. We claim the developments of the transfer borders and everything and energies and transfer in technological and investigation and collaborations by the diplomacy. And with this, we're always talking to you leaders around the world. The Ziran is taking care of the motherland, but their nurturing allows us to live.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the trade unions for the critical voice of the workers. Please, the voice is yours.
Ministra, hablo en nombre de la delegación
On behalf of the trade unions delegation that's made up by the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas, on behalf of the International Trade Unions Confederations, and as well as utilities, trade unions, transportations, and also the Colombian Trade Unions Federations, we would like to congratulate the Netherlands and Colombia's governments for developing this conference in a deeply complex global environment. We live in a climate crisis that has a fossil fuel war, and we can see that in the Persian Gulf and Ukrainian as well in our countries when they want to appropriate the resources of Venezuela, and also the extortion that Cuba is subjected to, expanding on a crisis that affects on its life conditions. And this is necessary. We especially value the decisions to open up our real trade union participation in this, that it's because we are convicted that there was going to be energy transitions without the workers. As the leaders from the trade unions, we consider that fair transition should be done on decent work, trade union freedom, collective negotiation, and social protection equality. It should include training and labor system, and to have a popular and feminist nature. We also see that this transition has to place the energy at centers with very participatory strategies and that are sustainable in time. But for this to be possible, we need progressive governments as Lula, as Petro, and as the next government of Ivan Cepeda, governments that are committed to these principles. We do need to move forward towards a stronger global governance with binding regulations and with mechanisms that ensure social and environmental justice. We struggle for a new social contract that is based on the principle that work, it's not merchandise, and that's why the access to clean energies and a fair transition should be acknowledged as a collective human right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the representatives of the trade union and especially of the Americas. I would like to give the word to my colleague, my Ministers of Multilateral Affairs of the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Colombia. First of all, I would like to congratulate the effort of the Ministry, Irene Vélez Torres, and also Stjepan Volthoven. And welcome all to Colombia. We are so happy to welcome you in Santa Marta, the heart of the world, according to of all the people that live in this territory. But this is a conversation that the world cannot delay. We can see that the climate crisis moves forward in a response capacity. The impact affects the most vulnerable people, and that's why we have an economy that is highly dependent on fossil fuels. This contradiction must end. That's why Colombia wants a clear conviction, which is that global discussion cannot only be focused on whether we move beyond fossil fuels, but we need to see how to do it in a fair and organized and equitative manner. We also need to ask ourselves how to do it together, because no country is going to be able to reach this transformation on their own. This how requires very specific national measures, but also cooperation mechanisms that turn political will into collective action. We can see that the highly dependent countries that depend from fossil fuels need real and sustainable alternatives that cover the structural inequalities. To move in the transition requires to release fiscal space so that they can invest in their product. The transition is built by diversifying the economies beyond fossil fuels, strengthening the bioeconomy, the sustainable usage of biodiversity, and new productive values that generate opportunities for the territories. We can see that the subsidies that perpetuate fossil dependency need to be transformed into supremacy in the way for transitions, and not only in the energy sector. And therefore, we can see that this is evidence, and also in very specific activities for the transition. These efforts should be rescaled by the national governments, integrating it in the public policies as a fair and accelerated decision.
Envoy from France to give some remarks. Benoit, the floor is yours.
Ministers, let me start by thanking both of you for hosting us here. It brings a wind of optimism in very difficult climate negotiation. And I agree with much colleagues who said that, yes, the transition has started. Yes, 10 years ago with the Paris Agreement, we make a significant move towards this transition. And yes, we are in a position to win this battle. So low carbon solution for France can be the backbone of real energy abundance that brings prosperity back to the communities. And one of the most obvious solutions is electrification, because electrification and electricity provide local value to our communities, help to shape the future of our economy and our industry, and they bring solutions when fossil fuel brings problems. That's the way we will try to work also with Africa in the next French-Africa Summit in Nairobi to unleash the green power of Africa. But France is also a leading electric power. Our electricity mix is already 90% low carbon, thanks to nuclear and renewable, and it brings back money, revenues to our national budget. Over the last 2 years, we were able to bring back 10 billion euros to our economy by exporting and selling green electrons to our neighbors. It can be a solution that can be shared with a lot of countries. We are very proud also to be one of the first country to publish a domestic roadmap to transition away from fossil fuel. If you allow me, because it was a top priority for my minister to prepare it and to present it here in Santa Marta as a recognition of your leadership and also to support our Brazilian friend, my colleague Nicola will bring back our domestic roadmap to the podium right now with a clear objective to phase out fossil fuels and clear dates, 2040 for coal, 2045 for oil, and 2050 for gas. And I just want to recall also that 10 years ago, President Macron made a bold step by deciding to end by 2040 fossil fuel exploration and exploitation on our domestic territory. We therefore encourage the development of national roadmap by all partners, and we will be there providing support, in particular for those countries who are on the first line of the actual energy crisis. We need also to use this conference
Ahora invitamos a nuestro vecino en Latinoamérica.
Now our neighbor, which is the Vice Minister of Guatemala. Thank you, Co-Chairman.
As an important step toward taking concrete actions to achieve a society and an economy that does not depend on fossil fuels, by strengthening international cooperation, closing governance gaps, and mobilizing financing. Guatemala already has a clear roadmap for reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. First, we are transforming our energy mix with the goal of achieving 80% renewable energy generation by 2032 based on hydroelectric, geothermal, solar, and wind power. Second, we are promoting the decarbonization of the transportation sector through the implementation of ethanol blends and the development of electromobility. But we recognize that this sector represents one of our greatest structural challenges in reducing dependence on fossil fuels. We are moving towards an orderly transition of the electricity system, incorporating cleaner and more efficient technologies, honoring existing commitments and ensuring supply stability, all of which are essential for a responsible and viable transition. However, these efforts face significant challenges. Limitation in financing, regulatory barriers, infrastructure gaps, and challenges in territorial governance persist, as do a high dependence on imported hydrocarbons and inequalities in accessing to energy. For this reason, Guatemala emphasizes that the transition must be fair, inclusive, and people-centered. This entails ensuring equitable access to clean energy, protecting vulnerable households, creating decent jobs in green sectors, and ensuring the effective participation of communities, including indigenous peoples, in decision-making. In this context, we call for strengthening international cooperation in three key areas: close finance gaps through accessible and predictable mechanisms, strengthening institutional capacities and regulatory framework, promote platforms for collective action that enable coordinated progress towards implementing the transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and also thank you, Frans, for presenting this roadmap, taking concrete steps, not just for today, but for future generations. So hereby, very happy to now invite children and youth and social movements. I'd like to give the floor to the children and youth spokesperson first. Please, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends, I stand today speaking on behalf of children and the youth sector, delivering a message as right holders, not just stakeholders. Children and youth are not passive beneficiaries of decisions made elsewhere. We are implementers of the just transition, living its consequences now and carrying them into the future. The ICJ advisory opinion has made clear continued fossil fuel expansion is not only dangerous, it is a violation of intergenerational equity and children's rights. Every new fossil fuel project entrenches harm and denies our right to health, well-being, and safe environment. States have binding duty to act with due diligence on fossil fuel production and consumption, because producing, licensing, and subsidizing fossil fuels can themselves breach international law. The supply-side measures and subsidy reforms on the table here are legal obligations, not optional policy, and a just 1.5 aligned transition is what compliance requires. Santa Marta must be remembered as the moment where youth voices become central to outcomes. Enforcement of states' legal obligation must include child's right impact assessment in economic, social, and energy decisions. Environmental impact assessment must be participatory, accessible, and inclusive for children, youth, and future generations. Our message is simple. Protecting youth and children's rights is protecting planet's future. Santa Marta must be the moment we reckon with just transition that is legally enforceable, debt-free, and intergenerationally fair. Lastly, as a Pacific Islander, I would like to add my support for Tuvalu to host the second iteration of this conference in the Pacific. Big fella, thank you, Tomas. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por recordarnos el compromiso que debemos.
Thank you so much for reminding us about what we should have regarding generational justice. We can see the representative of the social movements. Thank you so much, I'm Marilis Llanos, and also for the Summit of the Peoples. And we cannot lie. There is no fair transition whilst we keep on subsidizing the crisis, while we can keep under the rule of imperialistic governments that have a devastating loss from the social movements that have promoted this conference, given the failure of the COP and the insufficiency of multilateralism. We say that we cannot leave Colombia, and without this conference, without a definite and clear action toward that regulatory actions that establishes the governance to be able to have the phase out of fossil fuels through a binding international agreement that at least contains a liable plan for the phasing out of the subsidies for the production of fossil fuels in a financial structure that in no way means a higher level of debt for the countries, especially the ones in the global south, and the inclusion of alternatives for countries and the territories that are highly dependent of fossil fuels. We can see that the prohibition of new hydrocarbon projects, it's been said here, we can see that science and above all the reality has been clear in showing that climate change, it's not affecting us until we extract the last piece of coal. We besides need to ensure we need to have effective participation. We still have material and institutional barriers for participation that need to be overcome, and that's why the contributions that are done by the civil society need to have an incident in all the fossil fuels. We are worried about the treatment of the false solutions of the synthesis document of the contributions in which we have been participating. And each of the governments that are here should create and should strengthen effective treatment to be able to ensure a real and participation of the social movements in this process to be able to phase out fossil fuels. In this way, we need to ensure the non-repetition of the damages. Thank you so much.
And now it's my very great pleasure to invite to the floor Anna Toni from the COP30 presidency. You have worked, Anna, so hard on the roadmap. So please tell us, what can we do here today to complement all the efforts of the COP presidency? The floor is yours.
Hello? Oh, no. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Irene and Cynthia. It's what a great energy we feel in the room. So congratulations for Colombia and the Netherlands for this wonderful conference. I would like to start by quoting President Lula when he spoke at COP30, the energy session in the summit on the 7th of November, 2025. He said, "It took 28 climate COPs for us to commit it in Dubai to a just, orderly, and equitable energy transition. The Earth no longer sustains a development model based on intensive use of fossil fuels that have prevailed over the last 200 years. The world needs a clear roadmap to end the dependency of fossil fuel." That was his call. And the seed that Ministra Marina Silva planted at the pre-COP, and obviously President Lula at COP, has already borne wonderful fruits. First, we had an unprecedented and very hard debate at COP30 on the importance of a roadmap, but that also brought us together. Then we had this unique decision by the president of COP30, André Correa do Lago, to steer a process and to elaborate a roadmap on transitioning away from fossil fuel in an orderly, just, and equitable manner, and that's to be delivered at COP31. Also, the creation, as we heard today, of the Science Panel on Energy Transition, launched here this week to help countries to put science at the service of public policies and decision makers. And now we are here. And now we are here with such a wonderful energy in this historical first conference of transitioning away from fossil fuel, bringing together civil society, subnational government, trade unions, private sectors, movements, and the governments. But we are here not to fight. Here we don't convince anybody that we needed to accelerate the transitioning away from fossil fuel. We are here to debate with very pragmatic actions, solutions that can and should be taken nationally and internationally to accelerate this transition. All those processes are connected. They are really well connected and have a very common and important goal, which is to accelerate what we have already agreed through a multilateral decision-making process at COP28 to transitioning away. So we are implementing what we have already agreed. In relation to the COP30 roadmap, I wanted first to thank the 267 contributions that we received through the UNFCCC process. I also wanted to thank the dozens of institutions that have been helping us technically and supporting us with the roadmap, and the many organizations that are co-organizing with us several events in ministerial meetings and also climate weeks. There is absolutely no doubt that this conference here will bring vital inputs, strategic insights, and unique contributions and solutions to the roadmap. Therefore, in the name, on behalf of the President of the COP, I want to sincerely thank again Colombia and the Netherlands for this initiative and the partnership we have with this process here and the roadmap. They're absolutely connected. Dear friends, it has been only 5 months since COP30 in Belém, and so much has happened. Perhaps even the skeptical ones at COP30 have by now, with the war against Iran by the US and Israel, come to realize that a fast implementation of the agreed transitioning away from fossil fuel is not just vital to combat climate change, but is also vital for energy security, for energy sovereignty, for economic security, for economic fairness, for justice, and especially for peace. Dear friends, we know what the problem is, but we also know that there are technical solutions for that. There are also several forums, institutions, initiatives already working on the transitioning away. Our task here is to show that although complex, the transitioning is doable, is fair, and is needed. But it needs to be planned and it needs to be accelerated. We should also use this opportunity, as was mentioned by Tina, as we are here now, to come together and see what are we going to do together at the upcoming IMO meeting, which will decide the transitioning away from fossil fuel from the shipping sector. Those are concrete measures that we can take for the implementation of the transitioning away. Dear friends, I wanted to end again by quoting President Lula. He said, "We, as leaders, must decide if the 21st century will be remembered by the century of climate catastrophe or as a moment of intelligent reconstruction." So let us roll our sleeves here and start this rebuilding together, looking at rebuilding our energy system, our economies, but also the solidarity and what united us. Thank you so much for organizing the meeting. Thank you.
Tiene ahora la palabra.
Now we're going to give the floor to the Secretary of State of Slovenia.
Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends. First of all, thanks to the governments of Colombia and the Kingdom of Netherlands, and to you, ministers, personally for your engagement. Let me start with a simple point. The Paris Agreement is working, but not yet fast enough. Before Paris, the world was heading towards around 4 degrees warming. Today, because of collective action, this trajectory has been bent. But we are still living in a world already about 1.5 degrees warmer, and current policies still put us on a dangerous path above the goals we set in Paris. So the message is clear. We have moved the needle, but now we must move the system. And that is why this conference matters. It's not just another discussion on fossil fuels. It's a space to build the practical cooperation needed to transition away from them, fairly, securely, and in line with science. For Slovenia, 3 things are essential. First, the UNFCCC must remain the central pillar of global climate action. It gives us legitimacy, universality, and a shared rule-based framework. But the UNFCCC must also become more implementation-oriented, less about repeating commitments, more about delivering them. Second, initiatives like this one are not a substitute for the UNFCCC. They are a bridge to stronger implementation. They can help frontrunners test solutions, build coalitions, close government gaps, mobilize finances, do what is necessary and where the formal processes move too slowly. And thirdly, this transition will only succeed if we build trust. Trust between consumers and producers, trust between the developed and the developing, and trust that energy security, jobs, fiscal stability, and access to energy will not be treated as side issues, but as core parts of the transition. The task before us is therefore not to declare the end of fossil fuels in abstract terms. Our task is to make the transition credible, investable, fair, and irreversible, not only because of climate, but also because of fairness, resilience, and development.
Thank you, Slovenia, and thank you especially for highlighting that this is a bridge to more implementation. It is in no way a substitute to UNFCCC process. It's at the core of everything we're doing multilaterally, but we need to speed up the transition, and that is what we're aiming to contribute to here by going on here today. So thank you for underlining that. With that, let me give the floor to Mr. Juan Carlos Monterrey, Special Representative for Climate Change of the Ministry for Environment of Panama. The floor is yours.
34 years, we have negotiated the symptoms of the climate crisis, and we have bulletproof its cause. 34 years of pledges, and where are we now? Emissions double, oceans warmer than at any point of human history, and a generation that has stopped believing us. War in the Middle East is pushing millions into life they cannot afford. Economies built on fossil fuels are unraveling in real time. Fossil fuels are just not dirty. They are unreliable, they are dangerous, and they must end. That is why President Molino and Minister Navarro sent us to Santa Marta, not to manage this crisis, to launch the process to end it. We must pave the way for a legal instrument that names what it phases out and how we finance it. And let's not forget offshore drilling. 75% of exploration licenses last year alone were offshore. The treaty will take time, we know this. But the end of new fossil infrastructure and a commitment for fossil-free zones of life, those we can start deciding here in Santa Marta this week. To Colombia, to the Netherlands, to the indigenous people, the youth, the scientists and civic leaders, thank you. Thank you for dragging us here. Thank you for forcing us to finally have the conversation on how. Now, an energy transition is not only trading oil wells for lithium mines in indigenous lands. It is not about asking women to absorb its invisible cost. Extractive industries have threatened our ecosystems as sacrifice zones because nature has no rights. That is why Panama is also advocating for a universal declaration of the rights of nature. The legal loophole that allowed this crisis to deepen must be finally closed. The world has been waiting 34 years for a place to start. Santa Marta is that place, and the time is finally now. Thank you very much.
Queremos ahora dar paso a la
We would like to give the floor to the spokespersons of the subnational governments that it has a key, whose leadership is key to promote the implementation at the regional, state, and city level.
Excellent. Distinguished colleagues, bonjour à tous. Un plaisir d'être de retour en Colombie après le grand succès de la.
Well, the delegated.
For climate change for the government of Quebec. Quebec is proud to serve also as a co-chair for some national governments in the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, BOGA, an international alliance of government working to end the expansion of oil and gas production and to support, manage, and just transition away from fossil fuel. Also, I would like to salute our friends and partners, the Under 2 Coalition, which bring together nearly 200 governments committed to climate action. It's an honor for me to speak today on behalf of the local and subnational government. It means states, provinces, cities, and regions from all parts of the world. During the past 2 days in the subnational chapter, we shared experiences, we spoke openly about challenges, and we discussed solutions. One message came through very clearly. Work with us, not around us. Because subnational governments are where policy meets reality. We are close to people, we are close to our territories. We work directly with communities, indigenous workers, and local partners, and we turn decision into action on the ground. Just a few examples. In Quebec, we made a clear choice. We decided to fully end fossil fuel exploration and production on our territory. It's now a law. It's finished. Goodbye. In Brazil, the state of Espírito Santo used oil revenues to support a just transition through a state development bank and a public investment fund. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's build this transition as true partner. If we act as one, turning ambition into action, we can make a just transition not only possible, but unstoppable.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for underlining that the subnational is where indeed policy meets reality. For example, in housing and transport, we really need to harness your force, I think much more. Thank you for your contribution. Now I'd like to give the floor to the indigenous people from Colombia, and I also want to say thank you for hosting us in your country. The floor is yours.
Bueno, muy buenos días.
Well, good morning. We receive a special greeting for the indigenous populations in Colombia and around the world. Our territories are mainly to keep life within the planet, where our rights are respected and nature is protected. The focus of these rights is just an indispensable condition from the fair transition. Here we have the indigenous populations to precise that without the respect and the guarantee of our rights and particularities, as well as the free determination of the free consensus and free reported, the transition is going to be based in the activism, impacting even more our ways of lives as well as the ecosystem that we have been protected for 1,000 years. The special protection and differential from the indigenous population in isolation and voluntary, and as we call here in Colombia, the natural state, is a priority that we need to implement in a really urgent way. We insist the statement of free zones of extractivism activists within our territories, as well as fossil fuels as minerals, always respecting our lifestyles according to our knowledge systems and governance. as well as we invite to the countries to keep the practice of the autonomous practices within the indigenous populations for our participation in every single space. This should be respected, and we continue these coming conferences. And the participation will be to the self-representation and our autonomy. The indigenous populations were very strategical partners with the climate agenda for the transition will be effective. So that's why we invite you all to receive our proposal as a key factor of the transition, of the fair transition. Remember that all of us were really important. Remember that we are part of the nature and we preserve for life. Invite us always to construct peace, not for the word. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for reminding us to build peace, and we are at it in Colombia and the world. So we're going to give the floor to the Permanent Secretariat of the Environment of the United Republic of Tanzania.
But I also want to join previous speakers in thanking the government of Colombia and the Netherlands for the very warm reception and hospitality extended to my delegation. Tanzania acknowledges the ongoing global efforts towards transitioning energy systems and remain constructively engaged in advancing a just, equitable, and development-oriented transition pathway. This process, we would like to underscore, must be guided by multilateral frameworks where developed countries should and must take the lead through concrete domestic actions consistent with their historical responsibility. This transition must be enabled by adequate finance, technology transfer, as has been amplified before, and capacity building. For Tanzania, transition must go hand in hand with the poverty eradication, industrialization drive, and universal energy access, and must be gradual. Tanzania is advancing a just and context-specific energy transition by scaling up renewable energy, including hydropower, solar, wind, geothermal. And currently, renewable energy constitutes a significant share of Tanzania grid electricity mix, largely driven by hydropower. A key priority for Tanzania is clean cooking. About 90% of our households in the country still rely on biomass for cooking. And across Africa, as has been heard here, more than 600 million people lack access to electricity. So the transition of our people can understand easily is to see transitioning away from the use of wood fuel to clean cooking, including the use of natural gas. We are proudly that the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan, is a continental champion for clean cooking energy and energy access through Mission 300 initiative, reflecting her political strong commitment. I thank you.
Thank you so much. To give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources of Malawi, also hosting one of the breakout sessions later today. Minister Chipaliro, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the government of Malawi, I wish to thank the President, government, and the people of Colombia for hosting this extremely important conference where practical solutions to moving away from fossil fuels are being discussed. Our appreciation goes to the Netherlands for your vital role in this conference. Thank you to everyone here for keeping the momentum going. We all know how fossil fuels have negatively impacted and continue to adversely affect the climate, the economies, and the world itself. Malawi stands ready to listen to action plans, join forces, and work with the coalition of the willing to help the Fossil Fuels Treaty become a reality and to free ourselves from perennial disasters, economic pressures, and untold burdens. Disasters as a result of climate change and man-made crises have shown us that we cannot and should not rely on fossil fuels. Things can and do take a quick turn for the worse, leaving us helpless and stranded. We can pivot away from reliance on fossil fuels and look to alternatives that are clean and sustainable. I'm encouraged by the discourse that is taking place here and now, talk that is respectful to one another, plans that recognize our diverse needs, and realistic goals that are being set. This is the time to make the difficult yet permanent and corrective decisions. This is a season for pulling in one direction towards cleaner, greener solutions. This is a time for action. The Fossil Fuels Treaty, which is being loaded with well-thought-out ideas and research-based suggestions on governance, financing, and scaling up transition away from fossil fuels, amongst others, will be complementary to, not against, other interventions. I thank you for your attention.
Es un honor darle.
It is an honor to give the word to Francesco La Camera, General Director of the International Agency of Renewable Energies. Irena.
Buongiorno, everyone. Thanks, ministers. And thanks also for giving me the chance to speak and look into the eyes of these people. I completely agree with Jon Rockström when he says that we are living in a world where it's possible to consider war a means to settle disputes. We live in a world where I prefer to look in another direction, where genocide was happening in front of us. So the fact that you are here is a beacon of light for people of my generation. So thanks for being here. It's been said that we are living a moment of energy crisis. No? I've been saying this is the most severe crisis in the recent years. It's not true. This is the definitive crisis of an energy system centralized and based on fossil fuel. This is the end. And if you look what's happening around us, you see how the architecture is falling down just in this moment, in these hours. 2025 has been the year of renewables. The country, I mean, in other case, make the example of Spain, invest in renewables, no? Norway, with so many electric cars on the street. Denmark, with these romantic windmills that as magicians produce energy. How they've been more resilient in front of the crisis of these days. And renewables count 700 gigawatts. I want to repeat, today is another occasion. This is the double of all power capacity that is being installed by nuclear in 70 years. Renewables today are the most convenient way to produce power. They are competitive, 100%. They are more reliable, as has been said. They are more, stable. And we are coming with new numbers that say that renewables plus storage are more convenient than any other fossil fuel alternatives. We are happy to inform you that we have been asked by Ambassador De Lago, the COP president, to work on the analytical basis for a roadmap for transition from fossil fuels. We will present this roadmap in Copenhagen, the 20th of May. This is because Copenhagen is the same place where we presented our analytical analysis on the triple of renewable energy, that was so successful. We hope it will be the same. It will be also, we wanted to be, after this conference, to be the first tangible result of your engagement in these 2 days. The last things that I want to say, that I didn't want to take much time, I prepare to be in 2 minutes. So thanks for allowing me to speak a little bit longer. I really wish it that I don't know if you feel how much I love all you. It's you know, when you get my age with 40 years of work and see what all is around, see people here fighting, it's impressive. The last message that I want to say, believe me, the competitiveness of the economy of the future will be largely determined by the capacity of the energy system to provide electrons and molecules at the lowest cost possible. This is the reason renewables will win, and you will fight for a cause at the end where you'll be the winner. Thank you very much.
And you can see why we love having you here to inspire us, both with your passion for this topic, but also with the clear facts that show the direction of travel that we are taking. Now I'd like to give the floor to the Vice Minister for Climate Change of the Federal Republic of Brazil. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Congratulations to Colombia and to the Netherlands for convening this conference. I would also like to thank the COP30 presidency for carrying forward the agendas based on the call made by President Lula and all the discussions we had in COP30 in a transparent process. And I think we are working all together, as Anatoni mentioned, in order to help support countries so that each country can build its own path away from fossil fuels, but as part of a collective process. But right after COP30, President Lula also ordered us to accelerate the process in Brazil. Is this something that I would like to share briefly with you? We are working jointly with the presidency, the ministries of energy, finance, and us, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, to guide this process. And the good news is that we are not starting from scratch. We have 50% of our energy matrix renewable, 85% of electricity renewable, and for that, hydro was essential, but also biofuels was part of the solutions and still will continue to be part of the solutions, something that will help us to accelerate and to scale up solutions for the freight transport, for mobility, with also innovation like the hybrid engines, a new regulation, a new generation of biofuels, BECS, and so on. But what I would like to mention is the 4 pillars of our domestic work. One, the planning, NDC, translated in a clear action plan, the ecological transformation plan, a clear regulatory framework to enable the new technologies, and financing, and maybe the most important thing, a solid institutional framework for planning, integrating this in the mainstream energy planning of the country. So, as many of you have already said, there's no other way forward. We need to accelerate climate action and to overcome our oil dependence as part of the same package. And we would like to reaffirm Brazil's commitment to a global transition away from fossil fuels that is balanced, self-determined, fair, inclusive, and leaving no one behind. Thank you for convening us in this dialogue.
Le damos ahora la palabra al enviado especial para cambio climático de Italia.
Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends. I wish to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the governments of Colombia and the Netherlands to organize this event. Particular thanks to you, Minister Velez and von der Boven, to remain here until the end. It is not common or obvious and strengthen your leadership. Much has already been said. I could easily list Italy's action in advances the energy transition or our investment in renewable energy, our determined effort to phase out coal. However, after this morning of discussion, I would prefer to convey a clear message. Moving from commitments to implementation is essential, but is not sufficient. Together here we can demonstrate both the pathway forward and its economic viability, but we must go further. We must create a new diplomatic platform, independent, open and inclusive, free of barriers and accessible to those countries not present today, including major emitters. We must engage with determination. This means opening direct dialogue not only with those who deny the scientific evidence of climate change, but also with those who resist the economic logic of the transition. This platform is not intended for negotiation. There is nothing to negotiate. Rather, it is a space to clearly and firmly communicate the risk facing their populations, populations that governments have a fundamental duty to protect, to safeguard and to ensure a prosperous future for. This message must be strong and clearly communicated to people around the world to raise awareness. In my view, this is the most difficult challenge before us. Without addressing it, even the shift from word to implementation will not be enough to achieve real impact on the global climate. This is not policy. It is science. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesco, for indeed underlining that we are not here to negotiate, but to learn and to discuss jointly how we can make this transition work for people, because that is what will be needed to actually make the full transition. Now I'd like to give the floor to Canada, to the Director General for Climate Change. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And Canada would like to extend its sincere thanks to the governments of Colombia and the Netherlands for convening us for this important discussion. Energy policy is central to economic growth, to security, and to achieving our collective climate objectives. As a nation with vast natural resources and deeply committed to combating climate change, Canada is focused on building a strong, resilient, and sustainable economy. And we're doing that by building a clean, reliable, and affordable electricity grid, including phasing out coal-fired power by 2030, and investing deeply in renewable energy to power electric vehicles, buildings, and industrial processes. We're also expanding production of critical minerals that are key to clean technologies, and we're strengthening industrial carbon pricing to reduce emissions and provide long-term certainty for businesses and investors. At a time when global trade alliances are being disrupted and essential energy supply chains face growing pressure, international cooperation now, it matters more than ever. When we look at the current energy crisis, it's also clear that energy security, climate action, and affordability need to be considered together. For the world that we're building towards, we need adequate, affordable, reliable, and clean energy to power our economies, our industries, and our communities. There's no single solution, no one-size-fits-all pathway to decarbonizing energy systems. Cutting global emissions while meeting energy demand requires bringing a diversity of voices to the table, as we've heard today, maintaining our commitments under and the integrity of the Paris Agreement, and keeping our eyes locked on net zero by 2050. This conference provides an important opportunity for practical, in-depth exchanges on progress and barriers to the transition, recognizing that we're coming from different contexts and realities, yet we're united in our shared commitments under the Paris Agreement and the first global stocktake. So Canada is looking forward to these discussions and to feeding these proceedings and to work going forward, including the roadmap that will be presented by Brazil at COP31. Thank you so much.
We invite now the head of the International Climate and Energy Division of the Commonwealth of Australia. Let's remember that they are co-presidents of the COP31st.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, it is a genuine pleasure to be here with you in Santa Marta. My thanks to our host Colombia and the Netherlands for their leadership in bringing us together. Let me start by acknowledging my colleagues from Turkey who are with us here in Santa Marta and with whom we are working very closely in preparations for what I'm sure will be a successful COP31. And I also recognise the representatives from our Pacific family who we have heard from this morning. We look forward to the prospect of a pre-COP and a special leaders meeting in Fiji and Tuvalu this year. Colleagues, Australia's energy system is rapidly transforming, from one heavily reliant on fossil fuels to one that harnesses our sun and wind to power homes, businesses and critical services. Australian households are leading the way with the highest penetration of rooftop solar globally and now setting the pace on household battery deployment. As the fuel crisis has made plain, clean energy solutions support energy sovereignty, clean energy enhances energy security, and the transition will of course narrow the gap remaining to our shared goal to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. Now is not the time to hesitate. We must accelerate the rollout of renewable energy, energy storage and electrification to decarbonise our economies. Last year at COP30, Australia was one of 24 countries to join the Belém Declaration. This conference is an important first step to diversify our energy systems, to deliver an orderly transition away from fossil fuels, which will reduce emissions, yes, but will also support greater energy security and access, foster economic development, and improve health and well-being. We need to engage deeply with one another to understand the various pathways and options informed by science and economics to progress achievement of practical milestones as we work together to reach the goals we all committed to at COP28. And I commend all those who have contributed thus far to this body of work. Here, let me acknowledge the important work being led by Anna and the Brazilian COP30 team through its roadmap process. I look forward to the outcomes of this conference contributing to that work. And let me also acknowledge the establishment of the Science Panel for the Global Energy Transition and its great potential to support this agenda. I look forward to our discussions here in Santa Marta and working with all of you to advance our collective efforts through to COP31 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Australia. And then as a final speaker, I'm very happy to give the floor to the co-chair of COP31, Turkey, the Deputy Director. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today in Santa Marta on behalf of Turkey as incoming COP31 presidency alongside with our Australian partners. First of all, I would like to thank the governments of Colombia and Netherlands for organizing the first international conference on transition away from fossil fuels and for bringing together parties, experts and stakeholders for this exchange. As the incoming COP31 presidency, our three guiding principles, dialogue, consensus and action, will shape our work throughout the process. Based on these principles, we define COP31 as the COP of the future focused on implementation, on turning commitments into practical progress. In this context, we are shaping our climate action agenda through an implementation-oriented approach, and one of the areas we prioritize accelerating the clean energy transition. At the same time, Turkey has clear understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all pathway for the global energy transition. The progress in this area will benefit from an approach that takes into account different national circumstances, capacities and development priorities, as well as the key factors, energy security, access to finance, technology needs, and infrastructure development. With this in mind, we look forward to hearing a wide range of perspectives, deepening our understanding of different national realities and drawing valuable insights from the exchange here in Santa Marta. We will continue working closely with Australia Brazilian and Azerbaijan, as well as
your advice, your offers to help, and they will benefit us all as we move into the breakout group discussions, where again, I hope we can speak as friends and we can focus on what we can do. And one thing I think is what we can do is stand up and walk around a little bit, because if we need to get into action, a little bit of action to walk around, speak to people. Please, before you do check out the rooms, the allocation of the rooms, so that we can start in time. We'll still have lots to do during this conference, so check your room, make sure to be in time, and enjoy the conference for the rest of the afternoon. Have a good afternoon.
Colleagues, before you leave the room, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the great energy. We're so happy to have you here. We are expecting our presidential intervention at 2 p.m. So please be very attentive to your emails. We will be sending via email any schedule changes that we might have. So everyone, please be very attentive to your emails. Thank you.
The world doesn't need more promises, it needs actions. Colombia and the Netherlands take the initiative and lead the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. A call for those ready to move forward. Today, Santa Marta, where the mountains embrace the sea, becomes the meeting point. Here, science transforms into facts by the hands of the people. From April 24 to 29, the world moves toward a just, utterly unequitable transition.